Okay, Bikkurim, base olive.
No,
For,
Aleph Yud.
what do I do? I do the same thing. I do this olive yud.
Yes, because that's what we did yesterday.
Oh, so I'm doing the same thing I did last time. Okay. I don't know why I do that ahead of time. All right, olive yud. And these bring him recites from Shavuos till Sukkot, from the 7 days, from the 7 species, and from the fruits of the mountains, from the dates of the valleys, and from the oil olives from beyond the Jordan. Rabbi Yossi Agili says one does not bring Bikurim from beyond the Jordan because it is not a land flowing with milk and honey. Um, he who buys 3 trees from in his fellows brings and recites. Mayor Maya says even two. He who bought a tree in the ground brings and its ground brings and recites. Rabbi Yehuda says tenants unless he's also bring and recite. For Truma and Bikurim, one is liable to death, and the added fifth. They are forbidden to non-priests, and they are the property of the priest and are voided in 101. And they require the washing of the hands and sundown. And these apply to Truma and Bikurim and not to Misa. Okay.
Okay. Carrying on the comparisons of commonalities between these three categories. Yesh b'maser v'bikurim ma she'en ken b'truma. So maser sheni we're talking about and bikurim. So
Right.
what's in common? Obviously, shemaser v'bikurim tu'unim havas makom. You got to bring them to Yerushalayim.
Mhm.
U'tu'unim vidoy, and both of them have a vidoy associated with them. Bikurim has the Arami Obed Avi, and Maaseh Sheni has the vidoy of getting of biur, of having
Yeah.
got rid of it afterwards. Okay, there's no such vidoy with truma. Vasurin leonen, and an onen, someone whose close relative has died on that day, is not allowed to eat from them. Whereas truma is there's no such restriction. Rabbi Shimon Matir. Rabbi Shimon says that actually no. With Bikurim, I think just check that. Bikurim, yeah, he's Matir Bikurim to the Onain. Why? Why? Because he says that he says that they're compared to Truma, and therefore it takes on the din of Truma there. That's the minority opinion according to Rabbi Shimon. Okay, what else is in common? V'chayvin bebior. They both have to be removed if they're not consumed within a certain time period. Again, Rabbi Shimon Poter, he says there's no beer for bikurim for the same
Right.
reason as above. V'asurin kol shehein mi le'echol b'Yerushalayim, and if they get mixed up with other things, then they create isur in any amount in
Right.
Yerushalayim. Why? Because there's a matir over there. You give it to the oh, maybe Yerushalayim. If even if it was sorry, um, Masa Sheni Batal Barov. Masa Sheni is Batal in a majority, right? This is talking about when they got mixed up with the Chulin outside of Yerushalayim. But once these things are inside Yerushalayim, even in the thousand, they're not Batal. Um, and the reason for that is that the din of Bitul only applies to a mixture that has no other remedy. Okay, so we're talking about the din of Davash Yesh Lo Matirin. Okay. Whereas in the case where the Isser has in the mixture has some sort of heter, then there's no din of betel. Okay, why? Let me just see what getting to the what is the heter over here? Maser and Bikurim. Um, since it is possible to eat the whole mixture in Yerushalayim as Maaseh Sheni or as Bikurim. So since it is possible to have them to eat them all together on the same level of kedusha, that's the matir. So since it's davash yesh matirin, there's no din of bitul. Okay, and furthermore, carries on the Mishnah. Gidulein asurim milechol b'Yerushalayim. Um, and if they got planted and regrew, um, you in noda hatarov shel sheni or shel bikurim b'Yerushalayim v'tzimchu gidolim. Even the Gidulim are also to eat as chulin. In other words, they have to be treated as maser or as bikurim. If this happened in Yerushalayim.
Not the true.
Zarim v'la behema. Even for non-kohanim and for animals, there's this restriction applies. Rabbi Shimon Matir, and again Rabbi Shimon comes in and says bikurim are like truma. Hooray, elu b'maser over bikurim. So the summary of the Mishnah is these are the things that maser and bikurim have in common. Masha ein kain b'truma, which they do not have in common with truma. Okay.
Okay.
Next split is yesh b'truma over maser. So what's in common between truma and maser? In other words, maser sheni. What's
Right.
similar between the two of them? Masha ein b'bikurim. Kesha truma v'maser osrim isagorin. If you haven't separated them from your threshing floor, then you cannot eat the rest of your threshing floor. It's called tevel. Okay, so you're not allowed to eat that. Whereas if you haven't separated bikurim, that doesn't assur your threshing floor. It's not markev. Okay. Yesh lahem shiur, and there is a minimum measurement. Like even though min Torah truma it could be any amount, but the Chazal said that there's a minimum measure for truma, and of course maser is a tenth. But bikurim, there's no even Chazal didn't even put any measure on bikurim. V'nohagim b'chol haperos, and they apply to any kind of produce that comes from the ground, as opposed to bikurim, which only applies to the 7 species. Okay, bifnei habayis shelo bifnei habayis, and truma and maaser sheni apply even when there's no Beis Hamikdash, and bikurim only applies during this one mikdash. Ba'arisin v'chakoros uv'sikrikon v'gazlan, and furthermore, if even for people who don't own the land, like sharecroppers and renters, and even for robbers and gazlanim, the ones who steal the produce, the ones who or the ones who steal the land, if they want subsequently to do teshuvah, or they sold the produce to somebody else, then you still have to take trumas and masros, but there's no bikurim from there.
I'm,
So that's the
I'm,
comment. Yeah.
I'm not too sure. I mean, we've seen this a few times. The Sikron, the difference between them and a robber, they seem almost like the same thing.
And right. So it's a difference whether you're stealing the produce or the land itself.
Okay.
So the Sikrikon comes in and just steals the produce. The Gazlan actually takes the land.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Mishnah Daled, Yesh ba Bikurim ma she'ein kain b'truma v'maser. Okay, what makes Bikurim unique in the positive sense? Like, so you could say, well, this is just the same as the Mishnah that said, what does truma and maser have in common? That's not with Bikurim, but everything that we're talking about is in the positive sense of things that do apply. So what is unique to Bikurim? Shall Bikurim niknin b'mechuber lakarka, because we designate Bikurim when it's still attached to the ground, as opposed to the other two, which are only after it's been harvested. Adam kol sadehu bikurim, and it is possible to designate your entire field as bikurim if you wanted to. Whereas truma and maser, you have to leave something over to be chulin. And furthermore, he is obligated. He is responsible for them, which means that if he lost the bikurim, he has to take something else to replace them. Until he gets to Harabayas. Once he gets to Harabayas, then the Achrayos is completed and he doesn't have to replace anything. As opposed to Truma and Maaser Sheni, if they got lost, they got lost. You don't have to replace them.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Utuanim korban v'shir utnufa velina, and bikurim also has a unique din that it comes along with the korban, and it also comes. There's also all that singing and dancing that we're going to describe later in the Masechta, and tnufa, the waving that the kohen does with the basket, and lina. And furthermore, when you bring the bikurim to Yerushalayim, you can't just say, okay, I've done it, now I'm going back home. You have to stay the night in Yerushalayim when you bring the bikurim. Okay, and those are the unique rules of Bikurim.
Okay. There's another thing. The Sikron also, it says that they it's in notes. It says that they they pay the owner has to take a minimal amount or he kills him. He can kill him also.
When you?
On the robber, it says I can't find it. Um, can I find it now? I can't find it. It's the claim. Oh, um, a Sikh-grown terrorist who threatened to kill the landowner unless he surrenders his field or accepts it for a nominal fee.
Yeah.
And robbers unlawfully seize the fellow's field. All these must set aside true advice for the produce. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Anyway. Okay. All right. So okay. Yeah.
Okay,
Now,
thank you. Okay, Orla.
when I took out my place mark for the for Bikkurim, I took out the one also for Orla. So I don't remember.
Okay, so we're in base Tesvav.
Okay. That's fine. If a piece of flesh of the most holy of pickle or nota were cooked with other
No,
pieces, they are
no. Orla.
Orla, right?
Perik base, Mishnah 15.
Well, condiments of truma and kilai are, were fell into a pot. Neither these suffice nor to flavor, nor to suffice to flavor, but together they flavored. It's forbidden to non-priest, but permitted to priest. And Reb Shimon permits to non-priest and to priest. If a piece of flesh of the most holy of pickle or nota were cooked with other pieces, they are forbidden to non-priests, but permitted to priests. To priests, Reb Shimon permits to non-priests and to priests. If a meat of the most holy and meat of the lesser holy have been cooked with ordinary meat, they're forbidden to the unclean, but are permitted to the clean.
Okay.
Okay, now I'm back on track here.
Okay, Master Shani, Gimel Yud base.
Uh, if one lends jars for Meiser Sheni, though he sealed them, the Meiser does not acquire. If he poured into them without specifying before he sealed them, Meiser does not acquire. After he sealed them, Meiser acquires. Before he sealed them, they are offset in 101. After he sealed them, they render holy any quantity, but before he seals them, he may set aside Truma for one and for all. After he sealed them, he must set aside for each one. And by Shammai says he must open and empty the winepress, but by Hillel says he must open but not empty. Where does this apply? In places where they are generally sold sealed, but where they are generally sold open, the jar does not become non-holy. However, if he wishes to impose a stringency on himself and sell by measure, the jar becomes non-holy. Reb Shimon says, likewise, if one says to his fellow, this jar I am selling you without the jars, the jar becomes non-holy. Okay.
Okay, carry on one more. Hamolech.
Right. And if one takes Mises produce from an expensive place to a cheap place, or from a cheap place to an expensive place, he redeems it at the price of his place. If one brings produce from the threshing floor to the city, or jars of wine from the winepress to the city, the profit belongs to Mises Shani and the expenses out of his household.
Okay.
Onto lion. Okay. Um, Prudiyot are forbidden, but the Ramka is permitted. Wild men like creatures are wild animals, and Rav Yossi says they convey 10 uncleanlinesses does a human being. The hedgehog and a weasel of the bushes are wild animals, and the weasel of the bushes, Rav Yossi says that by Shammai say, an olive's bark conveys uncleanliness by carrying, and a lentil's bark by contact. The wild ox is the kind of domesticated animal, but Rav Yossi says it is the kind of undomesticated animal. The dog is a kind of undomesticated animal, and Ramea says it is kind of a domesticated animal. The pig is a kind of domesticated animal. The wild donkey is a kind of undomesticated animal. And the elephant, the ape are kinds of undomesticated animals, and a man may draw a plow or drive with any of them. The Kalayim prohibition applies only to wool and linen. Only wool and linen are rendered unclean by Nagayim. The priests wear this for the service in the temple, only wool and linen. And if camel's wool and sheep's wool have been lacquered together, if the greater part is camel's wool, it is permitted. But if the greater part is sheep's wool, it is forbidden, and it is half and half, it is forbidden, and then the same applies to linen and hemp cactus together. Okay,
Okay. Para.
moving on. Okay. Vav Aleph. Regarding someone who is consecrating Mekatos and the consecration ashes fell on his hand or on the side of the trough and afterwards fell into the trough, the consecration is invalid. If they fell from the tube into the trough, the consecration is invalid. If he took ashes from his tube and then uncovered the tube or closed the door, the consecration ashes are valid, but the water is invalid. If he stored the tube up on the ground, the ashes are invalid, but if he held the tube in his hand, the ashes are valid because it is possible to guard them. If the consecration ashes were floating on top of the water, Reb Meir and Reb Shimon say he may take the ashes and consecrate Mekatas with them. But the Chachamim say any ashes that touch the water, one may not consecrate Mekatas with them. But if he sprinkled the consecrated water and found consecrated ashes at the bottom, Reb Meir and Reb Shimon say he may dry them and consecrate Mekatas with them. But the Chachamim say any ashes that have touched the water, one may not consecrate Mekatas with them. Regarding one who's consecrating mekatos in a trough, and there's a trafe bottle in the trough, even though the mouth of the trafe bottle is extremely narrow, the water within it is consecrated. And if there was a sponge in the trough, the water within the sponge is invalid. What should he do? He should pour out the water in the trough until he reaches the sponge. If he touched the sponge, even though the water is floating above it in any amount, the water is invalid. We're going to finish this tomorrow. So we're going to, oh wait, I lost you.
No, we're not finishing it. Maybe there's a second volume if you
Yeah,
want.
what that is. I have no idea. It just went blank and this thing came on. So we only have two tomorrow, I think.
Para is much longer than that, so you
Oh,
might
I
have
had to get the other volume. The other volume. Okay, sorry. Okay. Let's forget there's another volume. Okay, we have Zvachim, and we have Vav Gimel. All who ascend the altar ascend toward the right, go around the altar and descend toward the left, except for one who ascends for these three things, one who would ascend and retrace their steps. How is the service of the bird Katos performed? He would perform Malika on his head opposite the back of the skull without separating, and he would sprinkle in the blood all the wall of the altar. The remainder of the blood would drain upon the base, and the altar would receive only its blood, while all of it goes to the Kohanim. How is the bird Ola offered? If he descended the ramp, turned to the surrounding edge, and arrived at the southeast corner, he would perform a lika on its head opposite the back of the skull and separate and drain its blood upon the altar wall. He would then take the head and bring its incision up against the altar, saturate it with salt, throw it upon the fires, and would then come to the body and remove the crop and the feathers and entrails which were attached to it and throw them into the place of the ashes. He would rend but not separate it. However, if he separated it, it is valid. He would then saturate it with salt and throw it upon the fires. Okay.
Super.
Okay. Hey. No, chete. If old slaves or old slave women fell to her, they should be sold. Land should be bought with the proceeds, and he enjoys the uswork thereof. From Shimon Gamliel says if he need not sell them because they are the pride of a father's house. If old olive trees or old grapevines fell to her, they should be sold as wood. Land should be brought with the proceeds, and he enjoys the uswork thereof. Rabbi Yehuda says she need not sell them because they are the pride of her father's house. Excuse me. If one spent money on his wife's property, whether he spent much or ate little, or spent little and ate much, what he spent, and what he ate, he ate. If he spent and did not eat, he must swear how much he spent and take compensation. A woman awaiting Yavam whose property fell, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that if she sells it or gives it away, the act is valid. If she died, what is to be done with the ketubah and with the property that comes in and goes out with her? Reb Shammai says the husband's heirs divide it and with the father's heirs, but Hillel says the property remains in their possession. The ketubah is in the possession of the husband's heirs, and the property that comes in and goes out with her is in the possession of her father's heirs. If his brother left money, land should be brought with it and he enjoys the usruk thereof. If he left produce detached from the ground, and land should be brought with it, and he enjoys the usruk thereof. If he left produce that is attached to the ground, says Ramea, they appraise them and determine how much they are worth with produce and how much they are worth without produce. With the different lamb should be brought. He enjoys the usruk thereof. The sages, however, say produce attached to the ground is his. Attached to the ground, whoever comes first gains possession of them. And if he comes first, he gains possession. If he comes first, land should be brought with it, and he enjoys the usruk thereof. If he marries her, she's considered his wife in all respects, except a ketubah is a lien on a first husband's property.
Okay.
Okay.
And we're done.
All right.
All right.
Terrific. I'll see you tomorrow, but tomorrow I should have both eyes, so I'll be able to.
Okay.
Okay.